You're listening to Opacity, a podcast about working in design.
Morning, Craig. How are you?
Good morning, Tom. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. I just got drenched in the Dublin rain from cycling back. Yeah, it was threatening to rain when I was leaving, and I got caught in it on the way back after I dropped my daughter to school. So that was fun.
Well, I miss those days. I mean, we used to always have those opportunities to ride our bikes in the rain. You know, like we don't get those chances anymore. So
yeah, it's kind of nice actually. When you know you're close to home and you can have a shower pretty quickly, it's kind of nice. But if you're trapped far away from home and it's cold and wet and rainy, not so nice.
But why do you need a shower if you're in the rain? Like that should take care of it, right?
Interesting take.
I don't know. Last I'm traumatized because last when was it? February or sometime January, February last year or this year. I slipped out. I don't know if you remember. I slipped out on the road and smashed my face on the road.
Oh, I do, yeah.
It was terrible. It wasn't really a rain issue. I think there was oil on the road when I was taking a turn.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I'm kind of riding in any weird conditions. I'm sort of still a bit shooken up.
Yeah. Well, just make sure to wear a helmet.
That's the thing. Yeah. Thank God I had a helmet. Otherwise, my wouldn't. Anyway.
Yeah. We wouldn't have your brain to for this podcast. So.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's get into the episode. Actually, quick update. How'd you do on your test last week?
I passed the test.
Oh yeah.
I passed it with flying colors. 37 out of 40.
Same with me, I believe. That was what I got.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, kind of on the cusp, but actually related to last week, just real quick, because this was what I was thinking as I was taking the test, how much their system of test taking was so much more usable than the practice tests, and I think that really did assist me trying to get through the test because they had a lot. I mean, the UI was very dated, obviously, but the features were good. Like you could cross out answers that you knew were wrong to sort of limit your just help you kind of focus on maybe getting to the last two or whatever. You could flag questions so you could come back to them at any time, as opposed to the app that you practice on where it's like you just answer and you're done, and then you find out at the end if you got it or not.
Yeah.
So the design of that system did help me. It facilitated me actually passing the test because I probably would have failed if I had a different system, which was interesting.
Nice. So that's good. Yeah, that's great.
There you
that's
go.
kind of that's good. That's relevant to our podcast, I suppose. We could talk about that again at another stage, but like especially when you think about the people how savvy people are when they come in to do things like tests, and they're could be very uncomfortable with tech. So it's good to hear you had a positive user experience.
It was wonderful. Yeah, the UI was terrible, but it was nice. It's perfectly usable and pleasant.
So functional, but not very pleasant to look at.
Yeah, I mean, it was fine. Like I don't have very high standards with these things. So
you've just committed this to audio, so that's cool. Well, glad to hear it. Congratulations, and
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You'll be on the road in no time, I'm sure.
Well, as with everything in Europe or Ireland, I don't know where it is, but just everything seems just complicated. Like I passed the test, and I think at home, or in the US, you'd pass the test and you walk out with your permit. You could drive home, with it. So it's like a thing.
Yeah.
And here it's like you pass the test. They're like, okay, go to this website and you'll find out what you have to do next. I'm like, oh god. And then I go and it's like, oh, now I need to put an application together, get these documents, send in the proof that I passed the test, and then so maybe someday before this year is over, I'll get a driving permit and you can take me out driving.
So maybe their UI design is decent enough, but their service design isn't that great. Is that what you're saying?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, congratulations. And as Irish people say, when you find out you're going to start driving, there's a saying, it's you won't know yourself.
I love that. That's one of my favorite Irishisms. Yeah.
You won't know yourself when you start driving, which is very funny.
I got that a lot. Like when I was switching jobs last, I got that comment a lot, and I loved it. Like it was just.
You won't know yourself at the new job now. You're so you're working from home. You won't know yourself. Okay, enough of Irishisms. That's kind of covers the intro. So we're actually going to talk about design-related stuff in this episode, and it's a topic that's kind of big and meaty, and so we're not going to try and bite off too much in this one episode because we could be chewing all day. So we're going to talk a bit about design systems. Yeah,
big one.
It's a big one.
Big one.
I suppose in the last 5 years, it's something that you'd hear a lot more of. I think there was a period of a few years ago where everybody was talking about design systems and I think that's probably at the start of people getting their design systems together, or them being kind of broadly used. So there's always a bit of like fanfare around that type of thing. Same with like when chatbots come around and that kind of thing. So
why, like, let's just start from the very beginning here. Why even bother talking about design systems? Have they not been talked about enough time?
I would say yes, they have been talked about enough. I'm a design system consultant in our company, and so I work on a design system team, and I also consult with product teams as well. So I guess I'm a subject matter expert in this. So I'd have, and I'm constantly learning things all the time. And I think everyone who works on a design system, especially one at scale, is constantly learning things all the time. So for that reason, I think it's probably worth to talk about, because I don't think everything has been said about them just yet.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I would agree with that. My perspective on the why, like you're mentioning at scale, I think from my perspective, the opposite of scale, like for the tiny, scrappy kind of small company, teeny tiny design team who is invested in the idea of creating a design system, really wants to do that, but getting to that point is a really challenging journey, I feel. From my experience, it's like, there's so many things on your plate, and then you also want to be pushing forward this thing because it's the right thing to do. But so regardless of your scale, it feels like every day's learning. It's a lot of, from my experience, a lot of trial and error, a lot of trying things out, realizing it doesn't work, and then trying to figure it out how to do it better and how to operationalize that within your context. So I think there's still like an open field of potential discussion and rabbit holes to go down.
Totally, yeah.
On the topic, yeah.
If we were to explain to the listeners what a design system is, so in the past there have been like pattern libraries, UI toolkits, all these types of things have been around for years. And usually they're kind of within a team, a design team and development team. They're a reusable source of components and patterns and stuff that they can build things out. Not everyone needs this, so I think it's more valuable for products that are scaling than a website or something like that. I mean, it's nice to have some level of reusability for that use case, but it's probably not as valuable as something like a product that's you're going to be scaling, you're going to be extending it out. So the decisions that you make all the time have an impact further down the road as well. So when people talk about design systems and they're kind of explaining it to someone for the first time, they'd often use Lego as a metaphor. It's a good example because it was designed years ago, decades ago. The pieces that were built then still fit with the pieces that are built now. There's infinite possibilities of what you can arrange things into. It's fun as well. So I think that's one of the things that people get. Everyone knows Lego, and people tend to like Lego as well. So it's a good kind of like 1 + 1 = 2 type analogy, I suppose, for a design system. From my perspective, where it kind of falls down a little bit is that it's not really purposeful. Lego is not really purposeful. It's more kind of entertainment. You can create lots of things. You can create anything really in Lego, but what does it generally tend to do after you've made it? Kind of sits there. It's either get thrown back into the bucket of Lego for the kids, or people like to assemble things and then they put it on a shelf or whatever. It doesn't actually have a job to do, and that's where I think the crux of it is, right? Because like what you build in products has a job to do. It needs to be refined over time and all that type of thing. So there's a few other metaphors that we can talk about as well, but I think at a high level, it's basically a systematic approach to assembling things. So you've got sources of truth. Buttons are always mentioned because they're a simple example. The buttons that you create, you can have one source of truth of that, and that can be assembled into multiple different variations of other patterns that have buttons and maybe have icons and have typography. But all the stylings for those things, the stylings and the code, that's the important thing. It's design and code are kind of centralized, so you can make an update in one place and push it out, and it has a scaling impact. Change the color here one place, or the styling of this here one place. It can roll out over dozens of screens, hundreds of products, depending on how widely the system is used.
I think the Lego analogy is good, and it makes me. And the way you were kind of explaining of it, sort of, it's good to a certain point, maybe, and then obviously, like, design systems have a fair amount more complexity there, and it reminds me of a question that I have or think about myself, because we have these kind of UI kits, component libraries of sort of maybe pre-design system days, I guess, and we still have them now, obviously. But like, at what point let's call it a UI kit. What point does that then become a design system? And it seems like the UI kit and the Lego analogy, they sort of make sense, because here's building blocks, put them together. Like there's no context, there's no like jobs, there's nothing that it needs to do necessarily in the UI kit. It's just like, here's the pieces, go have fun and play around and make some screens. But so I'm curious, like, is there like a minimum threshold in your opinion? Like at what point does that UI kit become a design system? Or like how does a UI kit grow up into a design system? Like what are a few of the pieces that are sort of like even minimum requirements? Because I'm sure there's like an ideal fully fleshed out crazy design system, but like, is there like a bare minimum that we can say, yeah, that qualifies as a system?
Yeah, I suppose like every design system will start small and grow. So I suppose the minimum that you need to have in it for it to be a design system, to my mind, is there needs to be a systematic approach to how things are thought about with regards to, I'll mention this word, it's probably familiar to some people, especially if they work in design systems, but like tokens is a common term that you will hear. And a token, they're kind of like an attribute. So basically like a token could be a color. So each different color in your palette is a token. So if I apply that, if I take the green, whatever green is called, Irish green, for example, right? And that's the name of our color. If I apply that, if I take that token, there's a source of truth for that and it's connected elsewhere. So everywhere that the Irish green is being used is connected to that system, right? So, but that's one token. You've got like colors that are tokens. You can have type styles that are tokens, like spatial measurements that are tokens. So you'll often hear about like the 8-point grid being used by a lot of companies. Things are scale in sizes of 8, so 8, 16, 24, 32, and so on. Sometimes they go as granular as 4 points, so you'll have 4, 8, 12. When you start making these decisions and start putting them together, the things that you build are using a systematic approach. So it's a systematic approach to spacing. You're using the spacing token. So buttons are always, 32 pixels or whatever, 40 pixels. And then they always use the green. They always use this type style, and there's a connection that's being created. I think at the basic elements, things need to be connected in that systematic way, not just from a design perspective. They can't just live in Sketch or Figma or XD or whatever. There should be a one-to-one with code. So basically what is available for you to be designing with is also to be available to be built with, and there's a shared language, the documentation, there's a shared understanding. It basically is a system. It's like an ecosystem. So it's not just a picture of things. It's like a kit put together in Figma that has all these buttons and all these different stylings, and it might look very nice, and it could someday become a design system, but it's an illustration of what a design system could be. But the system needs to actually work, needs to have code, needs to be usable, needs to be connectable and extensible.
How about documentation of that system and sort of articulation or annotation or explanation?
Yeah.
Because obviously you can put together your button styles with every state, and you've got it all fleshed out visually. Like this is how it should behave. All the type styles, the colors, the spacing, everything's perfectly done. You built the perfect button, and it's matching in code to the real, the live product out there. Yeah. But there's no kind of explanation of it. Maybe buttons aren't the best example, but like that kind of a thing, like does it require a documentation and explanation of how this component should work? And where it's appropriate, where it's not, and all of that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. Like, I mean, you can, like, that's a proper design system, where it's got like proper documentation, and it's not just, it's being tested, it's accessibility compliant, all those types of things are important. I mean, you can be an immature design system. You could be early in your days where you don't do some of that stuff. You're trying to catch up on that stuff. That's, that's understandable, especially if you're a smaller team. But no, I definitely, like, there's documentation required. I think designers love the idea of a design system. Back in the days of like brand guidelines and that kind of stuff, we're drawn to like systematizing the designs that we make. And that's great. It's a very important thing to do because it's scalable and other people can use it and build on it. But I think there's a lot of work in it. Like, to run a design system properly, there is a lot of work, and a lot of it is documentation. A lot of it is communicating the changes that you're making. So, I think there's different approaches you can take. A kind of, I think I would recommend someone to take an approach on focus on the small bits, the tokens, all those components, the kind of simplified components, and making sure that the rigor is there, with the documentation, with the thinking about it, and then you can assemble new things. But as you assemble new things, they become more complicated. Another analogy is kind of like, it's like ingredients. Like you can put out all the ingredients in front of you, and they have their own things. Like if the flour has been quality approved, and the butter has been quality approved, and all the type of stuff. But when you start mixing things together, there's almost like a chemical reaction, where now things change. It's no longer just butter and flour together. They've become this paste or whatever, and then, the more complicated the things get, the more thinking needs to be done about it, and the more rigorous and well documented things need to be, I think.
Yeah, it seems like nothing. I mean, you can't really assume too much. I mean, like coming from the small team scenario, obviously, like we're always strapped for time, and a lot of the design system work is sort of, we figure out how to carve that out of all the other work that we need to do because we believe it's important. But you mentioned like just the hard work of it. Yeah, there's a recent article from Laura Hanlon, 10 Reflections on Designing a Design System. She works at IBM and has worked on their design system. So she's got some tips and or some kind of learnings from her journey there. And the first one was kind of basically what you just said, like design systems work is hard, and that it takes a village. Like it feels like, regardless of scale, like we mentioned earlier, like it's just hard work. It feels rewarding, like from my perspective, like any progress we make is super rewarding and feels great, especially when there is that consistency between your design files and what's in production. But God, the amount of work that goes into that at every step, like the work from designers, the alignment with engineering, operationalization of it, to make it so, and requires so many. It requires everybody involved to really be invested in it and to want to make it work. Because if you have sort of a missing link, the thing can sort of fall apart. From my kind of observations and experience.
Yeah, totally agree. And that analogy of like it takes a village, I think it almost takes a country or continent in some stages. Like there's so many levels of complexity on top of, like the design system itself can be self-contained, right? But who's using the design system? It's not such a challenge if you're a small team, you're a startup, you're all in the same room, or there's 20 people and you're all kind of building the same product, because it makes sense to think systematically early. Even if it's not an official design system, it makes sense to do that. But what if you're a multinational company? What if you have of dozens and dozens of different types of products within your product? I'm not overly familiar with all of IBM's products, but say someone like, say, Microsoft or Google, for example, right? So they're huge companies and they have loads of different offerings all under the banner of either Google or Microsoft. And the tools that you use for Microsoft, for example, are like, they can be wildly different. They can be Word, they can be Outlook, or they could be Teams, which is like Slack. How do you create a system and think consistently and coherently about creating that system that's scalable and take care of all those needs? Because every one of those products, to me, they're almost like their own country. It's a bit like trying to wrangle. It's a bit like the European Union, right? So they're all under the banner of Europe, but they're all their own individual countries, and they all have their own individual motives. They have their all individual politics, and they may not align on everything, So like, one country wants to do one thing, the other one wants to do the other thing, or something is created by one country, and you might think, oh well, say Microsoft Word have created this new thing, so Microsoft team are going to uptake it. And teams could be looking at it going, that's no use to us. Like, why would we uptake that? That's built for your use case. So that really is no use to anyone else except you. So should that go back into the design system? Is that a localized thing? So that's another challenge as well. It's about like contribution back. The core of the design system should be kind of composable. It should be like decomposed into building blocks that can be assembled into many different types of shapes and sizes for different use cases. So you wouldn't take Microsoft Word's whole panel and put it back into like a panel on the side that's very specific to Word and of no use to anyone else, and put that back in the design system, probably, I don't know, into the kind of core design system, because no one else is really going to use it. It could be there, but it might not be any use to anyone else except for Microsoft Word.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, the country reference is good, and thinking about sort of the centralization of the management of a design system versus something more decentralized and kind of spread out. I mean, obviously, like the Google example, I can't even wrap my head around the complexity there. Yeah. So in your experience, like, have you seen centralization work better? I mean, it feels like maintaining kind of a standard is an important piece of the design system. It's not kind of a move fast and break things kind of a environment, right?
No.
It's more of a serious, systematic, a standardized, coherent, consistent, all of those good words,
Yeah.
kind of a thing, which seems like, if you take the country analogy, it feels like that's the dictatorial rule of, we are the truth, and you all, like, all the minions must sort of abide.
Yeah.
Might be a bit dramatic, but I wonder, is that how you've seen it work well, to have it more centralized, or is it sort of something that can be opened up and sort of contributed to from the unwashed masses, no, from all of from all of different teams.
What I've seen in my experience is there should be like a whatever you want to call it, like the core building blocks and thinking on all the bits that you can use to assemble what you need to assemble, and that needs to be kind of governed and owned centrally, and that, like, so basically all of the things that you see in the different products, if you've got a mature design system and everyone is kind of using it, or the products that are using it properly, you should see things that can look a bit different for different use cases, but there's a connection there. They're assembled using, maybe they're new things, but they're assembled using the centralized thinking. So they're all assembled using the same spacing, a consistency of spacing. They're all using those color tokens. They're all using a consistent, even like shape tokens. So like these are the shapes that we use. Not everyone would use triangles or whatever. So it could be squares. These, and then on top of the square, it could be another token we have is our border radius. It's very simple attributes. So if I apply this color with this shape and this border radius, that's a consistent thing that we use, and that's made up of 3 different tokens. And then maybe you'll say something like, oh, and we usually have a drop shadow on that as well. That's a 4th token. It's a token of a dimension and stuff. And then you can say, and then when it moves, when it comes on screen, it eases from here to here, and that's another token. That's kind of a motion token. So you're basically, but if you're using the consistent tokens, even if you're making new things, if you're Teams, when Teams in Microsoft, I'm sure when they came along, it was like, right, well, this is quite different. The closest thing that's out there is probably Slack. I'm sure they learned a lot from Slack. So they're basically like, I'm sure they had to make a lot of new things. There might be similarities in other products, but they had to make new things. I don't use Teams a lot now, but I'd assume if it's working well, they would be assembled using the fundamental thinking from the system, and they might have very specific, complex solutions. But there should be things in those solutions. Maybe you don't take the whole their side panels that are very complex, for example, but you can decompose them, so you can disassemble them back down. So if we're going back to a Lego metaphor, for example, maybe Lego Batman's and his Batmobile come out, and you're like, oh, this is really cool, and it looks like Lego, but it looks very much like Lego Batman. I wouldn't mistake it for a different Lego thing, right? The Batmobile is no use to anybody else because it's very specific to Batman. But maybe you can take the wheels off the Batmobile. Maybe you can take disassemble it, take it apart, and then you can reassemble some of those parts. So those disassembled parts, the wheels, the building blocks of the thing, may be brought back into the core part of the design system, and others can use those or thinking from those. But nobody else needs the Batmobile itself. Batman can keep that, But maybe Wonder Woman wants to have the wheels and add it onto whatever vehicle she has or whatever. I'm using a few different analogies here, but.
No, it's good. It makes me think, where's the space for experimenting or like, on one hand, it's really nice to think about that and say, okay, these are the bounds within which your creativity should be. Like, you can propose new components when necessary. I assume that's a thing that happens with big teams, but it's sort of you wouldn't propose something that's maybe outside of those bounds, right? Like, I mean, maybe you could. But
yeah, it shouldn't stifle innovation. Like, it's not a preset. Yeah. It's always growing. Like, so I'll go back to the Microsoft Teams things. Just say, for example, because they created Teams, they had to focus more on chat, right? And how the logic around chat and messages and all the type of stuff that would be probably a newer challenge for them. I'm not sure if they've done it like that in the past, right? So that's kind of innovative stuff for them. That is new stuff, like, and that is it could be using some of the thinking that's in the past, but it could be it could have just the only thinking that it's taken from stuff that's done in the past is visual styling, but all the interactions are all completely new. Well, then they can be things that do go back into the system, we have new ways of thinking about motion. We have new ways of thinking about transitions from screens and states, and because of this new use case that we've come across, because it's very specific. I think that's the important thing is, that your decisions and how you move things forward are informed by the specificity of use cases, and then you can leverage them later. There is another metaphor that I like that's universal, trying to tend to think of it more so than Lego, and it's IKEA. This is something I mentioned months and months ago to people in work. There was a metaphor that I put together, and then I heard recently that a Clarity conference, maybe, I think IKEA shared that that's how they think about it as well, which makes sense because it's IKEA. So I would hope that they would use their own kind of thinking in the digital realm as well. But the thing about IKEA is a system, and stuff is assembled. Not everything on IKEA, but if you want a Billy bookcase, for example, for your shelves, like that is like almost an iconic piece of design that they have. It's something that they replicate. They can be used in many different use cases. People use it in their home. People might use it in their business and that kind of thing. It's assembled all using this consistent, the same shelves, the same fixings. Those fixings would be kind of like core components that they can use for those, but they can also use them for other furniture as well. They think systematically because it's when you have, a kind of a controlled way of doing things, it means that it's more scalable. Why would we make all these individual fittings for every different piece of furniture when we can have a consistent approach to how we do it? We can just kind of reuse this thing over and over again on different pieces of furniture. We can reuse the tools to make that. If you've assembled a Billy bookcase and, I think they kind of use it like an Allen key kind of system to lock things, or maybe there's some screws, I can't remember. But if you use something new for the first time and then you assemble another thing in IKEA and it uses the same thing, you've got that mental model of, oh, okay, I've used this before and I can assemble it. And I think the fact that they think about their documentation is very much, sometimes it can be complicated, but they simplify it as much as they can to that particular thing. You're not looking at the documentation for everything in IKEA when you're assembling a bookcase. You're just looking at what you need to do for that thing. Yeah, but people hack IKEA as well all the time. That's what I like about IKEA is it's functional and people can hack it. I've seen people making beds, like assembling beds out of like maybe Expedite or Kallax. I can't remember the names. Some shelving kind of unit. If you go on Pinterest, you'll see loads of different people hacking IKEA.
I think I heard there's a whole website of all the different things you can make out of other IKEA furniture. Yeah.
And that's what I like about it. So if IKEA then looked at that person going, oh, they made a bed out of these 4 things, that's really cool, right? Now, I'm not sure they would ever do this, but they can't go, well, why don't we just use that? Why don't we make that bed now? Okay, because someone's being innovative. They've taken this simple or straightforward enough thing that we have, even though a shelving unit when it's assembled is complicated enough, like to assemble. But they've decided to add that shelving unit with this sort of thing and combine these sort of things, and they've made something innovative that maybe we can monetize, or maybe not. Maybe it's just that it's in that person's home, and that's all, but never gets back into our system because it's too particular and too specific for their dimensions in their home and stuff,
Yeah, I mean, I think they do have some of these kind of shape-shifting furniture. I mean, probably a whole lot more could be done with it. But yeah, here's a bookshelf that converts into this if you want to, because all the pieces work in this way, and you get 2 direction packs, and you can build whatever you want. Like kind of with my son has a bed, and it's a bed with like a thing that you can put on top, but then you can flip it when they get older, and it'll be kind of a top level bunk bed with like an area underneath to play or put a desk or whatever. Yeah. So it sort of grows with the child, which there's obviously with cribs and all these things turning into beds, like there's obviously a whole thing that could be done there. Furniture that grows with you. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, IKEA's probably well aware and prepared to do that. I'm getting triggered now because I had this IKEA issue this summer. I don't want to get into it. But but it actually, in terms of the system, it actually kind of applies to the systematic kind of thinking. So I bought a bookshelf. I got it delivered from IKEA in Dublin. Paid an arm and a leg to get it delivered because I don't have a car, obviously. One piece was wrong, and I couldn't believe it. I sat there. I'm like, no, this is IKEA. They have a proper system. This is not like a hand packed some person in the factory put the wrong piece in. Like I assume that's not how they do it. I assume there's a machine, and I generally trust machines. Probably shouldn't. But there was one wrong piece, and was like, well, if this is wrong, then there must be like thousands of packs out there that must be wrong because something was wrong in the assembling, of it. But anyway, it was actually wrong. I tried to build it like 10 times just because I was convinced I was the one that was wrong. I trusted the system, but the system was wrong. And then it took me 5 months to get them to deliver a replacement. So,
ouch. Okay.
IKEA customer service during the pandemic is rough.
Well, I suppose that's exceptional. Like, it's not exceptional, but it's, it's unprecedented, as the word is often used.
It is.
I think generally they're pretty together.
That's another thing. Is like, I trust the system of their customer service to like resolve it immediately.
Yeah.
But no, they were ghosting me on emails, and it was a rough. And then you couldn't call them because they didn't have anybody at the thing to answer the phones because everything was so crazy. So, yeah, weird times kind of throw your system in the loop.
Yeah, you just remind me something there around like with design systems is that they're not just a product, like they are a service. And you just mentioned it there, like with how you felt with that service at the time. Like, so obviously that's not usually how they operate, and I think every company has had similar problems around through the COVID time so far. But I do think, especially on bigger teams, that like the communication is very important when you're making updates, because you can make updates that small updates, like like what you would imagine would be small updates, can have far-reaching consequences. They can cause breaking changes, for example. Like, if you update the type style, we used to be this size, now we've bumped it up a couple of pixels, we're now this size. That might sound great and might look fine in the test files that you have in Figma or Sketch, and you're like, oh yeah, this definitely looks better, it's more legible and all. But that, if you push that out and everyone accepts it, that you can cause problems elsewhere. We're just like, well, this particular thing was made to accommodate this size text, or it wasn't set to be scalable, or whatever. You can cause breaking changes all the time. So the communication of it is very important, and the more products that you have and the more specific those product needs are, it makes it more important to understand. Just say something simple. We make an update to the button color, and that sounds very simple, right? But there could be all politics applied to all those different products, like the countries in the EU. Like, not everyone wants to take this. Like, for example, like, everyone took the euro currency, and then Britain didn't for whatever reason. Like, but you can there is politics there, and they either might not want to make those changes as well, like take the same thing that everyone else has taken, or just not right now for some reason, because every change that you do, especially for big companies, there could be like so much documentation. There could be training courses created for that company, for integrations and all, that now need to all be updated because of small changes. I think the important thing is that at the core of the design system, that we're optimizing all the time and making the best solutions. And maybe Microsoft Teams takes the updates, but Word doesn't for some reason, or not right now, but they have plans to update it later. So maybe they have a local version of what they're doing, and it's a little bit out of date, but they're planning on updating it. So as you were saying earlier on, you can't rule with an iron fist. Like, if you go, well, no, we've updated this thing, everybody's taking it, and push it out, you'll have mutiny, because
war will break out.
Because it's just not practical. You just can't force people to take those updates, but it should all be informed. Like, a good design system is centralized in a way, but it relies on the specific use cases of those other products to stress test the design system, feedback if there's usability issues or accessibility issues or anything like that, to refine it basically based on real world use cases. Because if you make a library of stuff and say, here's our buttons, here's our type style, here's our colors, here's our X, Y, and Z, great, there you go, now go and build. They can be abstracted from reality in a way. It's only when you actually assemble them and then think about all the interactions, you're like, well, we thought this looked good, but actually when we tested it doesn't play so well with this other thing on our screen or whatever, and it's only with the specificity of those use cases that you find out what does and doesn't work and how you can refine things.
Well, this was a good chat. I appreciate it, Tom. I appreciate the chance to pick your brain a bit about this.
Yeah, we could talk about this forever.
I mean, it's obviously a huge topic. I mean, but like, it's also awesome that, I mean, obviously design systems, it's nothing new. Everybody's on the train. But, to see also these design system teams, I don't know, like a few years ago, did design system teams really exist much in maybe the larger tech companies? But I don't know. Like, it seems like a newer thing, and it's obviously great, and it sort of emphasizes the value that it brings. So yeah, we could talk about it for a lot more. Maybe we will. Maybe in a coming episode, we'll continue continue where we left off.
Sounds good. Yeah. I've no shortage of things to talk about. So Craig, where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find me. Sometimes I tweet stuff on Twitter. CP5446.
It's a cryptic handle.
That's pretty much it for now. Well, there's a 5446 it's a reference to a reggae song.
Oh, really?
I can let you know. Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway, I was really into reggae in high school. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's obsessed with reggae, actually. And how about you, Tom? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm Tom C Design on Twitter. I tweet kind of regularly enough, mixture between design related stuff and kind of procreate art and that kind of stuff, I suppose. But I'm also, Tom Cunningham. You can find me on LinkedIn. So thanks very much for listening. We always appreciate it if you like, subscribe, and share around as well. If you think any of your friends or colleagues would be interested in hearing what we have to say, that'd be great. So, yeah, thank you. Until next time.
See you later.